Doctor. I'm a professor in infectious diseases, the faculty director for this community of practice, and the chief of research at our VA. Today's session is jointly sponsored by ICTR and the Madison VA, and we are delighted to welcome Dr. Grant Huang, who is the Deputy Research and Development Officer for Enterprise Optimization at the VA. Dr. Huang helps lead an enterprise-focused research strategy for planning, integrating, and coordinating VA resources to enhance evidence-based care for veterans. This includes field-based research programs at over 100 VA medical centers, where preclinical, clinical, health services, informatics, and genomics research is conducted. He is also the leader for the Cooperative Studies Program that we're going to be hearing about today, and I'm very excited to hear about that. That is a clinical research infrastructure that is supported by the Office of Research and Development at the VA that specializes in the design and conduct of multi-site clinical trials and large-scale observational studies. During his VA tenure, Dr. Huang has been part of the design and conduct of over 100 multi-site national and international clinical studies, has established the Million Veteran Program, and has implemented quality standards for clinical trials. He has over 125 publications in top-tier journals and a number of recognitions, including the President's Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award from his efforts with CSP and a Master Teacher Award from George Mason University. Grant, we are so pleased that you're able to join us today, and thank you so much. As you can see from the number of participants, there's a great deal of interest in this topic.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Nasia, for inviting me. I really do appreciate your and Teresa's efforts behind the scenes and helping me to get to meet such great people. I'm really excited to participate in this, not only because of the topic, but also because of the work that we'll be doing at the Madison VA and with the University of Wisconsin. And so if you can give me one moment here, I will try to get my slides up, and hopefully it will all work according to plan. I'm hoping people can see my slides okay. And
yes, we can.
Excellent. So let me get this in presentation mode. So again, thank you everyone for having me here. I'm really excited to talk about some really great opportunities, not only within the VA, but in partnership with university affiliates and others. And so as you probably have seen by now, the title of my slide is talking about the clinical research enterprise, which I'll describe in a moment. And my hope here is to leave you at the end of the talk with not only some excitement about the clinical research work that is being done, but also about what the future holds with regards to the opportunities, especially within VA. What I'll try to do is to get through my slides and my presentation in about 45 minutes or so, leaving some time at the end for some question and answer, and we'll see how this goes. So with that said, I want to, again, highlight the VA Research Enterprise. What is that all about? What does that mean? I hope some of you have already heard a little bit about that, but I want to go a little bit more into detail about what that means and the strategic directions we have, and then focus especially on the clinical research enterprise that we have within VA and the fact that we have a proud tradition of work that we have done for many, many decades. And then closing out with talking about some partnerships and some models of how we've been working together within the VA in various clinical areas. So I want to just start off by saying that, again, if anything, I'd like to have this audience be aware and thinking about what the VA Research Enterprise is about. Here, as you see in my titles, in my slide here, you know, I have the privilege of going around meeting a lot of different folks and to talk to them about what we do in VA research. But the one thing I'm really proud of is the fact that we have such a great diversity and set of resources, people, and activities. And so what we've been talking about when we talk about the enterprise is really a whole of VA approach here. When we say the research enterprise can be tremendously powerful for improving veteran and national health, I think most people understand that what we do in VA research is, of course, focused on our veterans, but also we address problems that the country faces as a whole. And so therefore, you know, we have an ability to address a lot of important questions, not only because of the clinical research we do, but because we're embedded in the largest integrated healthcare system in the country. And so with that said, if you're not familiar with the research program, some people, I think, of course, are aware that there is a research program, but you might not know all the details behind it. So I'd like to spend just a few moments going over a bit of our background, mission, and the like. And many people have not realized that research is one of 4 statutory missions for the Veterans Health Administration. Now, I want to just be clear, sometimes people misuse the term or get confused with the term VA, VHA, and the like. VA, since 1989 or so, used to be known as the Veterans Administration, now called the Department of Veterans Affairs. And within that, we have a division, 3 divisions actually, but one division specifically focused on health, the Veterans Health Administration. And as part of that, given the long history, the research mission has always been a part of it, as well as our educational clinical care. And more recently, most people are aware now that the 4th mission within VA is to provide healthcare in the case of a national emergency like the pandemic. Of course, we're focused on improving veteran health, and we cover a range of research activities. And again, today I'm going to be focusing more on the clinical research activities, but we really also want to bring into the system and to partner with really high caliber investigators and clinicians. And so in that regard, I think one of the things about VA that I really love is that we have a great culture of research, of professionalism, of service, and all again, focusing on our veteran population. With that said, we have over or nearly 100 years of history, and many people don't know this, but I thought it'd be particularly relevant for this group. I love to go around and tell people that the very first multi-site clinical trials were done in the VA. Most people are familiar, and I apologize, I'm getting a internet instability signal, so if my volume or anything like that taps out, please bear with me. But one of the things I've been telling people again is that most people are familiar that the British are the ones who get credited with the first multi-site clinical trials, and in some degree that's true, but they don't realize that the VA worked with the British in the UK in the first early tuberculosis trials. The major difference, of course, was that the UK folks they randomized, whereas the VA did not, and so that's the major difference. So while the British get credited with the first randomized multi-site clinical trials, we were there right at the table with them where we did, again, the multi-site trials. And again, from that history, we have what is now seen as a foundational part of American medicine today. Of course, there's been a lot of accomplishments, the cardiac pacemaker, first liver transplants, and so on and so forth. And you see this, but the other things too is that we have a proud history of really having foundational practices of American medicine. Many people who are in medicine know the kind of the saying, take 2 aspirin, call your doctor in the morning. Well, that of course came from a cooperative studies program trial back early on, several decades ago. And in addition to that, many people of course are very familiar with the institutional review boards. Again, something that was not realized that was something that was started in the VA prior to the passage of various statutes and the like protecting human research subjects. So again, a lot of proud history and a lot of traditions that have lent themselves towards, I think, an overall culture of innovation and thinking about new ways or better ways to do the work that we do. With that said, what makes us successful? Again, we've got a lot of history, a lot of experience. We got a lot of resources being, again, embedded in the nation's largest integrated healthcare system. Of course, we have our partners and affiliates like the University of Wisconsin, which again, I hope to talk a little bit more about in a moment. We've got great people, and then of course, we've got a lot of opportunities, innovations, and then the healthcare system backbone for which we can build a lot of these things. In many regards, I get to tell people, especially those who are a little bit envious of us, to say, "You've got all the resources." I said, "Yeah, we do," and we also have, if you will, a natural setting for where we can then apply the research and do the work that we're intending to do. And so, with that, what is this research enterprise I keep talking about, or that maybe hopefully you've heard about by now? Given the history that we've had, a lot of this, as many of you are familiar with, has many academic roots. A lot of it is investigator-initiated ideas, investigators kind of creating their own labs and ideas and sending forth. And in many regards, that's very critical and important. However, the challenge with that is sometimes it does not necessarily get connected with the larger system or the larger set of needs there. And so in the past few years, we've been really moving towards helping to transform the research activities into an enterprise model. And what that means, as I mentioned earlier, was really to set up the entire group of people, tools, processes, and really focus them and organize them in a whole of VA approach, again, to address our primary mission of improving veteran health and their well-being. So science, of course, is key, but the fact that it's science alone will not be able to help necessarily translate at the end of the day, especially in these days when things are much more complex. There's a lot of things to consider. There's a lot of pieces of an organization as large as the VA that need to be incorporated. And so we're really trying to move things forward in a way that really understands and appreciates the environment that we're in and the opportunities that we have. And so you see several of the qualities that we're aiming for in the enterprise. Some of these things are probably quite intuitive, but nonetheless, if you think about from a formal organizational standpoint, they really need to be highlighted and emphasized and cultivated. And that's what we're trying to do in the research enterprise. And so with that said, we've had a couple of strategic priorities. I've listed the top 5 here. And you'll notice that one of the things that I've had the privilege of leading the past several years is focused, and particularly relevant to this group, is the focus on high quality clinical trials. What, again, we have been recognizing is the fact that while VA has done many multi-site trials and a lot of clinical trials in general, the challenge is that a lot of times the type of things that we do are different than, for example, what an industry group might do or what other federal agencies might do. And so they also, of course, bring knowledge, resources, and tools and the like. And so we've been working with them quite some bit. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on for the rest of the talk, to, again, really ultimately increase opportunities for veterans and also investigators to be a part of these really high visibility activities that can make an impact. Of course, we're trying to ensure that we're not just doing research and just publishing papers, but we want to have real world impact. We want to be able to, again, translate and transform the healthcare system and how veterans get care. In addition to that, we take advantage of the fact that we've got a lot of data and that we can use those data for, again, research, scientific purposes, and for operational activities behind our research. We more recently have added a couple more strategic priorities focused on diversity, equity, inclusion. This isn't just with the patient population, but of course with our investigator pool and anyone really who works with us in research. And all that, of course, is focused on building a community, which again, I think is quite unique in the VA system if you're not already familiar with that. And so this is kind of a schematic of what I try to help illustrate the idea of our enterprise strategy. So many of you probably know various groups. You probably work with different parts of the organization, whether it be on the academic side or even on the VA. You probably get to know people, somehow you get introduced, and you kind of get to figure out how things might work. And the challenge, of course, a lot of times you always hear that, if you've seen one VA, you've seen one VA. It's not a replicable model. In other words, you might figure it out on your own, but another disease group or another research group might have to figure out something quite different. And so, a lot of this is just kind of more personal experience. And the problem, of course, is that based on that person, and all the work they've done, if they leave or move or whatever happens with them, that knowledge is lost. And then you have to rebuild and reinvent these wheels. And so what we're hoping to do is to move away from a more informal network approach where people kind of work based on who they know or who they encounter, and really have a much more organized and coordinated approach where, again, there's a more systematic approach to how we operate. There's a systematic view of what are the priorities. There's an understanding of where the pipeline of activities will go towards in terms of why they're being done and how they're going to be used. And so in that regard, one of the things I'd like to just highlight within VA research is that, by nature, I think many of us who have done science and research for some time, we understand the need to organize and coordinate and to keep proper records and to have SOPs and the like. And so in a lot of regards, we're hoping that we can use a lot of that training and that know-how, again, to help organize the larger part of the organization that can utilize the work that we do. So with that said, one of the things that we often face in the clinical research realm, which we are often trying to solve, I would presume that this community of practice that's on the call today has talked about it quite some bit, is recruitment. There's a lot of problems that we can tackle, but I'm going to focus on recruitment for today because I think it's helping to showcase what we are able to do within the VA. But many of you know Dr. Louis Lasagna and what's called Lasagna's Law, right? For those of you who've done or taught clinical trials courses, you all know too well that the problem is that when people are trying to design studies and estimate sample sizes and the like, they oftentimes are over ambitious, overestimate the amount of patients who are who are available. And, in fact, for those of you who have applied for awards or grants or the like, you probably know all too well that the reviewers who are looking at your proposal are very skeptical because it has happened, this problem with recruitment and underestimating how many are available happens over and over and over again. And so with that, that's no different from what we faced within VA and the Cooperative Studies Program in particular. We've been trying our best to figure out ways to get ahead of the recruitment issues and trying to figure out ways to, really deliver some value and timely results. But nonetheless, we continue to face some issues. And so several years ago, in fact, I'd say probably almost close to 15 years ago, so myself and some others were asked to figure out what are better ways to tackle recruitment problems that are continually a chronic issue with us. And so, I just want to highlight a couple of things.
Frank, sorry to interrupt. Do you want to maybe turn your video off? I don't know if it's just me, but there seems to be a little breaking up.
I'm sorry, Dante, did you say my video is breaking up here?
No, I'm saying if you want to turn your video off, that might help with the bandwidth.
All right. Hopefully that's a little bit better.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. So, going just real quickly, going back to some of the problems again that people understand. These are some figures and some reports that maybe some of you are generally familiar with the idea that most people have heard about clinical trials, but the problem, of course, is that people don't participate in clinical trials. And so, there we go. And so, most people have heard about it, they don't participate in it. And so, how do you get people to be really engaged and involved with this? And so with that said, I'm going to turn my attention to the Cooperative Studies Program. This is something that if you're, again, not familiar with, it's I'm not using, this is not my term, this has been used by others. In fact, the Secretary has used this term more recently, where it is the flagship research program for clinical research within the VA. We started, of course, with clinical trials coordinating centers that recently expanded into clinical trials coordinating centers as well as a pharmacy coordinating center. In addition to that, then that expanded into epidemiologic or observational study coordinating centers. And then most recently, we've also then expanded into what we've called the network of dedicated enrollment sites or node centers, which are facilities that are specializing in recruitment. Of course, I'd like to just highlight that Madison was most recently awarded one of these node sites, and we're looking forward to working with Nasia and her team to get that set up and going. But this is, again, kind of a broader approach that we have with tackling a lot of things, not just recruitment, but many other many other clinical research challenges we face within VA. And so you'll see that they're spread throughout the country. There's certain parts of the country that are probably we're trying to figure out how to get to them. There's particularly rural areas, but nonetheless, we are, I think, certainly more national in scope. And so with that, again, with the idea of recruitment challenges, I had the privilege of a few years ago to be part of the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, which is a public-private partnership between Duke University and the FDA, which involved members from federal government, from academia, from industry, and the like. And there was a work group that was put together to talk about a strategic framework for how to address recruitment. And you'll notice that they focus not just on the trial design elements, but also talk about feasibility and site selection. And that's probably, again, well known these days. But the other part too is communication and working with the people that are going to be involved, not only as participants, but also helping with the studies and helping build, again, a broader reach for those who might be interested. And so with that framework in mind, that was the basis of a lot of the things that we've been doing in the network of dedicated enrollment sites, as I mentioned earlier. The NODES program, or the NODES initiative, is again a consortium of these VA sites. We have 23 of them now. We started with 10 and we recently expanded to 23. And what they are focused on is really a locally based community of specializing not only in recruitment, but building a community of research, clinical research, to be able to raise awareness, to build partnerships, to facilitate the operational activities that are needed to deal with these recruitment challenges. One of the things that oftentimes gets noted about nodes is that they have a focus on recruitment, which of course is very important, but as you know, I hope this group is familiar with, it takes a lot more than just simply putting flyers up or just even approaching someone in the hallway or whatever it might be. It really does take, I think, a community effort. It does take a more systematic approach. It does take some best practices that others have learned and try to continue to improve upon. And so that's what this node idea is all about, which we're really excited about the Madison VA as being a part of all of this. This is just that map I showed you a little bit earlier, but just taking out the CSP centers that are part of this. So I believe these slides were given to Teresa, and she can certainly share them with the group afterwards, if not already. And the hope here is that you will get to see where are some of the groups that are working on similar types of problems and challenges. The idea here, of course, is that they will have a local focus, trying to focus on the VA-funded studies, especially those by the Cooperative Studies Program, trying to get them up and running, making sure that they're operating smoothly. There's some, staffing and other models that we have in place to allow them to not be, if you will, individual silos based on study, but rather take a team approach. But the idea here is that they are part of a national network here, that then they are working together, sharing ideas, and again, having a coordinated approach towards common challenges and problems that we face. And we hope that that will be, again, exported to not just within other VA sites, but really to any colleagues. We've been working with the NCATS group and the CTSAs. We have a great partnership with them. They have for those of you who are not familiar with the CTSAs, they kind of have a similar model in some regards, but we're working with them in partnership with RFAs, joint RFAs. We're working with them on sharing models and working with their Recruitment Innovation Center in Nashville at the Vanderbilt University and the like. So, we kind of have a parallel network structure to at least another group, and hoping that some of the interchanges between the groups will help really, again, solve some of the problems with clinical research, but also bringing more trials and more opportunities to our veterans. Some of the things, just to give you an idea of what the nodes group has done, is they've come up, again, as I said, with some best practices. I've highlighted a few here, and if you're interested, the publications are there if you want to read more about them. But one of the things that we did was something called a MORE strategy, a mobile recruitment strategy, where really it's part of a larger initiative where rather than having veterans come to the clinic or come to the facility, we've started to take an approach where we can think about how can we bring the study to them. In other words, one of the big challenges is, I think people know with any study, is that they have to come to the facility, to the brick and mortar location. They have to find the place, and then all the things are related to it, driving, parking, and the like. And so, we thought about another approach where we thought, what, how can we best serve our veterans so that they, can be less inconvenienced, that they can have a better, awareness of our dedication to them. And so we said, okay, why don't we figure out strategies where we can bring studies to them? And so this mobile recruitment strategy is very simple. It's basically a laptop, it's a roller bag, it's some trials equipment and a printer and the like to help with printing consent forms if necessary. It's also a screening curtain if that privacy is needed. But we kind of take that on the road, if you will. We use that to go from a facility out to a community-based outpatient clinic or to other locations where a veteran might be, and then to recruit them from wherever it is more convenient to them. From that, I don't have any other slides or any details, but we've now been able to expand our ability to recruit from kiosks at Walmart and go out to various locations. So again, there's a lot of different approaches for how we now try to reach out to veterans. In addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of data that we can use. And so the intent here is to utilize our informatics system, and I'll have a slide in a moment about Vinci, where we use that to help inform study coordinators about patients who might be coming in for a visit or available, and therefore let them know how they could reach out to them and possibly recruit them. In addition to that, we also very much focus on developing sites, helping them be trained, helping them understand, the larger environment and what are things that are unique to VA. So we have some mentorship programs as well that the team is leading. Real quickly, if again, if you're not familiar with our called Vinci or VA Informatics and Computing Infrastructure, this is effectively it's a copy of the corporate data warehouse that we have. It's based out of Salt Lake City, and that coincidentally is where one of our node sites are. And so what we do is again we tap into the power of that corporate data warehouse, and we then determine what patient populations are available to help with not only recruitment, but also in the planning stages and to determine feasibility and to hopefully get a bit more of a realistic picture of what the situation might be at not only for the across the whole VA, but at particular facilities that we're thinking of having participate in our studies. And so again, the idea here is that we want to bring trials to veterans using the experience of the VA, using our knowledge and our ability to understand the system. What we've been doing more recently is to then partner with others who are outside the VA, who may not be familiar with how the VA works, or maybe not understanding all the different policies and procedures and the like. And we kind of help to navigate, if you will, for those selected activities, whether it be with industry or other federal partners, to bring, again, more studies to veterans. And so with that said, I hope you're getting this idea that, you know, the innovation that we've had within VA, that we've been able to come up with some solutions, and we hope to build off of that. So, you know, we use our experience as a model and to see how we can continually improve. And so with that said, we were able to take our nodes initiative, and more recently, actually a couple of years ago now, we then had a similar type of a network developed with the National Cancer Institute, focusing on bringing NCI trials to veterans. Now, of course, those are therapeutic trials, oftentimes some prevention studies, where we, VA, on our own would not have the opportunities to bring those therapeutics to veterans. But now through these partnerships and through this network model, we have established 12 sites that have now, again, are focused on doing NCI studies. They are also now starting to help with industry-sponsored studies as well. But nonetheless, now working with another major sponsor, federal agency in the NCI and their oncology groups, we're able to bring studies to veterans in that regard. And of course, that is something that was not coincidental, but very timely with regards to the cancer moonshot at the time. And so we were able to stand up this capability, which has since gotten the attention of Congress. They're very supportive of it, and in turn want to continue to have this be bolstered through other means. And through that, you know, this is something that I'm also glad to talk about, which is, you know, focusing on cancer as one of our clinical priorities. We've been able to use the model of nodes, which then extended to Navigate, which then extended to something called the Lung Precision Oncology Program, or LPOP, and then focus specifically on lung cancer screening and lung cancer trials. And we're now on the process of also focusing on prostate cancer, which was done through another mechanism, but now kind of integrating it more with our models of recruitment networks, and then now focusing on genitourinary cancers as well. And so with that, you know, going back to the enterprise model, we partner with our National Oncology Program Office to, again, make sure that we're not just doing research on our own, but rather working together with them on their priorities and strategic initiatives, and seeing how the intersection between clinical as well as research can work together to bring, again, greater care and outcomes for our veterans. And so with that, one other extension of the model, while a lot of that has been focused on cancer, you'll notice that we have now starting to work on another area, which is Alzheimer's disease. I hope this is already familiar to the group, but of course, we've got the Alzheimer's disease research centers led by, Dr. Astana and others at Hannah Blazel and others at the University of Wisconsin. And so that model of nodes as well as Navigate was then something that the National Institute of Aging was very interested in, and said, you know, we would like to try to do something similar for those with Alzheimer's. What can the VA and the NIA do? And that subsequently led to these supplements that, of course, the University of Wisconsin and 4 other universities received in partnership with their respective VA medical centers, to then again serve as recruitment networks using best practices and the like. And so for those of you who are not familiar with what is being done with the ADRC, it's very similar to what we've been doing with the nodes and the navigate programs. And so we've got a playbook already in place for these disease-based recruitment networks. We're also connecting them where possible, where there's synergies to help, again, with best practices and understanding, how VA policies work, and to troubleshoot on a central level if necessary, so that each facility doesn't have to figure it out on their own. While this is still early on, we hope that this kind of initial, I'll call it a pilot phase, will continue to develop. And, of course, Alzheimer's affects a lot of veterans. And so, there's a lot of interest in our clinical partners for this area as well. I'm not going to go into all the details about the supplements, but the slides are here. But again, the idea here is that what we were able to do, and really, again, working with the University of Wisconsin team, have some really great strategies and some approaches, which again followed a pathway that we helped establish with nodes and navigate and others. But of course, they take kind of their own unique perspective of it, their own unique capabilities, and they have applied it to the work that's being done at the Madison VA as well as the University of Wisconsin. There's tools, as I mentioned earlier. There's coordinators who are exchanging ideas. And one thing, if you're not familiar, the National Institute of Aging has something called a door, which is a toolbox where they put all their recruitment resources and other things that they've developed. And one of the great things that the University of Wisconsin team has developed is a resource for working with American Indian veterans. And so, I highlight that here. And if you have not seen this, this is some wonderful material that was put out. In fact, the artwork and some of the things that you see on this slide was done by one of those veterans. He was really a key part of the conversations. Kind of took it upon himself to develop this, to reach out to the Native American population, and as a result, we've got some wonderful tools that not only are localized at the Madison VA and the University of Wisconsin, but now can be used in other places as well, wherever there's a population that might be interested in this. And so with that said, I want to just kind of spend a few minutes to then kind of take us to kind of where we think things are going to go and what else is being developed outside these federal partnerships. The one thing, as I mentioned earlier, there was a strategic initiative by the Office of Research and Development focusing on increasing access to clinical trials. And so a couple of years ago, in partnership with our nonprofits, in partnership with industry and other patient groups, we embarked on a 2-year initiative to focus on how do we facilitate industry trials being done within VA. The problem that we were facing is a lot of industry partners would come to us and say, you know what, we don't understand the VA. We just talked to one VA, they told us one thing, they thought they could replicate another VA, and it's a different approach. And it was that you've seen one VA problem that we kept running into. And so they were getting frustrated, understandably. They were wondering, what is it that we can do to help with not only helping them understand, but also really getting studies up and running quickly, because of course time was of the essence for them. And so this Access to Clinical Trials initiative was focused particularly on partnering with industry. But as I noted before, we had a parallel arm that was focusing on federal partnerships as well. So these two were working in conjunction with each other. As a result, we established the Partnered Research Program. I've put the website here in case you're interested. We also have an email address. And real quickly, what this is it's a front door for any industry partners to come to us, say, you know what, I have an idea. I want to work with multiple VA medical centers. How do I do that? They fill out a form. They provide some basic information, and we'll look at it and say, you know what, this is something that we think would be a win-win for us. So let's talk more. We'll help them get started. We'll help them with confidential disclosure agreements that cover any VA investigators. And then if it gets to it, we will help facilitate cooperative research development agreements to go through and really be a template for all the VA sites that might be interested, not just one VA and then having to replicate that all over again. So there is some central coordination that we do through the Partnered Research Program. I want to say that this is a relatively new program, and you'll note that when we started this was in 2018, and we had given ourselves a 2-year time frame. And if you kind of calculate, it was April of 2018, so a 2-year time frame would have taken us to April 2020. And you might recall that the pandemic hit us around March. And so we accelerated things. Fortunately, we were already almost done with a lot of the key parts. And as a result of this effort, we were able to have VA sites be part of several of the national vaccine trials that were launching up. And that was a part of a whole of government approach called Operation Warp Speed at the time. And so all of these things, again, came together simply because we recognized a need, we recognized a problem, we tried to address it. And fortunately, we were ahead of the curve and we're ready to deploy some of these resources to help with these industry trials later on. Real quickly, again, I already mentioned some of these points, but if you're interested in what the partnered research program is, I invite you to take a look at the slide and what its priorities are. But really, again, it's about facilitating the startup of studies. And once we help it get going within VA, we then effectively hand things over to the VA medical centers and let them do what they need to do. And that then, all the startup efforts, all the activation energy, if you will, doesn't require as much effort locally, but rather they have, again, solutions that can help all sites who are doing the same thing. And so in closing here, I just want to mention that, again, we're really proud of our research partnerships. The Cooperative Studies Program, which I've had the privilege of being a part of for quite some time, we emphasize the cooperation, the cooperative part of that quite often. And so, that is a model that we have. And again, I see that certainly happening here with the Madison VA as well as the University of Wisconsin. And we hope that we can continue to facilitate that, which is why I'm so glad to be a part of this. With that, I'll go ahead and just acknowledge that we really want to thank our veterans, of course, who we serve. These are just a few of those individuals who have participated in our studies in the past. And with that, and thanking them, I also want to thank you for your attention and thank you for your time. And I'd love to, as I believe time permits, open things up for question and answer. So with that, I will stop sharing. And Nasia, I'll turn it back to you and follow your lead for how you'd like to have any conversation or Q&A after this.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Grant. I see that we have a question in the chat from Dr. Schweitzer. If we have an idea for a cooperative study, how do we start the process to see if VA is interested?
Yeah, absolutely. So within the VA, again, if you're not familiar, it is an intramural program. Ideally, you would go to our website, and I can put that in the chat or send it to Nasia later if you've not seen it. But basically, the Cooperative Studies Program has what we call a letter of intent that we receive. It's actually a mini proposal. And what we ask is really a lot of the key details, not only the question hypothesis, but your initial idea for a design, site feasibility, and things like that. We will then have it reviewed, and if accepted, we then assign it to our coordinating center to then be fully developed. I wanted to say that before you come up with an idea and just submit it, kind of, if you will, without further notice, it would be best to just send a note to us in the central office. csp@va.gov is the email address. The reason is because, as you might expect, we've been quite popular for a lot of reasons. A lot of our budget currently is tied to a lot of the priorities of the agency, including traumatic brain injury, cancer, soon to be military exposures, and other things. And so, it is a lot of work to put together a letter of intent. So we certainly ask that you talk to us and to see, kind of what your idea is, how it might fit. The other thing too is we can also help any potential investigator understand what we're looking for. And really what we want to do is to make sure that there is a fit, that it is something that we think has, if you will, a pathway, not only to do a trial, but subsequently to be implemented within the VA healthcare system. One thing I did not mention about our CSP studies, which I think is important, is that one of the things we have now recently required for all new CSP trials is an implementation plan. In other words, in many years, we've done a lot of great high impact journal publications, New England Journal, JAMA, and the like, but that's not our end goal. Our end goal is ultimately to have this translated to care. So we want to make sure that any study that comes to us has an idea for how that they might implement this study within the healthcare system, which is a little bit more work on the investigator's part, where they need to maybe be connected or talk to clinical groups and others who might say, is this something that they really want to see done and that they would get behind, assuming that it is, of course, well designed and the like. So as you might expect, there are a bit more conversations, a bit more work that has to be done that is a little bit more than what people are familiar with. But that is something that, again, just for full disclosure, we want to make sure people are aware of so they don't unnecessarily put in a lot of work and be disappointed if it just doesn't quite match what we're looking for.
Thanks very much, Grant. Another question from Sandy Klutzel. I'm an early career investigator currently with a CDA2 and SPIRE. Both are clinical trials involving veterans' Parkinson's disease. We have a node site at our VA hospital. Is there a pathway to help individual VA investigators, especially with training for an early career investigator?
Yeah, so that's a terrific question, especially given your interest in Parkinson's. So, I think because the node site at Madison is just getting started, I'm not quite sure where it is quite yet for a new CSP study we've got in Parkinson's related psychosis that is starting up. So if you're not aware of that study, it's called CSAP. I don't think that's going to be helpful, but it's also known as Cooperative Study 2015. And that actually is a study that is involving our PADRECs, or Parkinson's Disease Research Education Clinical Centers. So if you're not familiar with that, I certainly invite you to send me a note afterwards and I can connect you with them. But definitely, if you're interested in learning and doing clinical research and knowing what's involved, that is, I think, through nodes, a great opportunity, because again, what we want for nodes is not just simply to do trials, but to have them connected with larger communities of investigators who are doing these multi-site trials. Nodes itself doesn't help necessarily with individual projects, although of course we would hope that, and Nasi, I don't mean to speak too much for you, but in your role as ACOS for research as well, that there'd be opportunities for you to be connected either through the research office or, especially in clinical research, through those communities and investigators doing work in that.
That sounds great. And I should also just mention, Grant, that we did send this flyer around to other VA sites in our VISN. So you might find that we have people from our neighboring VAs as well, which is terrific.
Yeah, absolutely.
The next question has to, which I think is so important, and I know we've discussed this over the years, but William Gilmer asks, the lack of centralized infrastructure such as that which often exists with some academic research centers is a major obstacle for clinical investigators.
Yeah.
What is the potential for the mission of the node centers to be expanded to provide clinical research infrastructure for non-CSP clinical studies?
Yeah, this is something I'm laughing because sometimes when you build something that's, addressing a critical need, people want to try to, if you will, add on to it or see how they can leverage, which I totally appreciate and understand. Part of this, again, not to get too ahead of things, is that, when Nodes started up, it was really primarily focused on ensuring that its main mission of helping CSP, cooperative studies program studies, could be done was a primary focus. One of the challenges that came up when we started up Nodes almost 10 years ago was that others, just like yourself, had said, this is a great infrastructure. We need this. We can't get it. How can you help? And really, if you will, the policy that I've had for the node sites is to say, look, as long as your primary reason for existing is to help support CSP and VA studies, it's really up to the facility and the nodes team to then determine how else they could be of help locally. Each facility, each medical center, each academic affiliate has different needs and different opportunities. And what we kind of think about the Nodes program as a local investment, of course, with some immediate priorities. But our long-term goal, of course, is to really again grow the importance of clinical research, clinical trials, both within the VA and maybe even with our partners. And so I'd really have to say that the potential is really there. Not to put too much on the Nodes team there at Madison. They're just getting started. They're just getting personnel in place, and it will take them a couple of years to kind of really get into the flow of things. But we hope that this will be a kind of a long-term investment that will again have a lot of local roots developed as well.
Thank you. Sounds great. Another question from Dr. Schweitzer. Does CSP mostly fund individual randomized controlled trials, or are you also interested in other study designs like cluster randomized trials?
Yeah, so again, great question. So first of all, I'll just say that pretty much any, we specialize in a lot of clinical research activities. Of course, we do randomized trials. As I think I alluded to earlier, we also do observational studies. We were the foundation for the Million Veteran Program, so working into genomics and the like. So, just want to make sure that the group is aware of that. And in that regard, we are, again, seen as a clinical research enterprise. With regards to the type of trials or design, so actually one thing, I don't think he's here, but Rick Chappelle, who I hope you all know, is a member of our review committee. So he might have some interesting perspectives that you might want to talk to him about. But a lot of times when a study comes to us and they propose a cluster randomized trial, we don't rule it out. But I think what oftentimes is lacking is the investigator or a team's understanding of what it takes to do a cluster randomized trial within the VA. So again, as a large integrated healthcare system, it's, there's a lot of policies, there's probably some bureaucracy that you have to deal with, local clinical decisions that have to be made, may have to go all the way up to the chief of staff or at some level, maybe even medical center director. So it's not as simple as we want to do a cluster randomized trial because it's, the right design. But then in my role as the director of the program, I'll ask, well, okay, so what steps have you thought through to get the approvals that you need to make this happen? And sometimes, because it's not always a clear path, it might be, I'll say, a path of least resistance to do an individual randomized controlled trial. So, there's a lot of considerations I can get into, but I think that's just kind of giving you my thought process there. The other thing I want to mention also about pragmatic clinical trials is that we definitely have a program of pragmatic trials. Something that we're really proud of is something called the Point of Care Research Program, where we have embedded clinical trials into our electronic health record system, where at the point of care, you can have prompts that come up to say, and these are for, of course, comparative studies, where you might have two different types of drugs that are already on the formula. Say, which one do you want to do? And then and then you go through a consent process and ask if the patient is willing to be randomized to one of two, possibly even more medications for which there's equipoise that exists. I can talk more about that at some point later if you're interested, but we definitely have a number of different trial approaches and designs that we utilize. I think that's, again, kind of a neat part of what we get to do within our program, working with various operational and clinical partners.
Sounds great. Thank you. The next question is from Adam Gepner. Is there a mechanism through your program to identify other VA sites to partner with for multi-site clinical trials?
So a mechanism. So if I'm understanding the question, so there's a couple of ways, right? So whenever there's a study, cooperative studies program is funding, we have coordinating centers, very much like I think what you have there at Wisconsin, where their job is to identify and to kind of put out the word and see which sites are available. The node sites, if that's maybe the context that you're alluding to here, are a kind of a more readily available group of sites where we can kind of not only determine interest, but also get more details to help with study design and feasibility and the like. So there, I think that the point here is that there are multiple ways for how we can communicate and solicit interest. The other thing too, for non-VA funded studies, for example, our industry partner studies, that's one of the things that our office does as well, is that I have effectively a way to reach out to all our R&D offices throughout the country and put out the word of an opportunity and see what interest there might be. So there's a couple of ways where we can communicate and determine interest.
Sounds great. Thank you. Maybe I'll chime in with a question, Grant. If there were a couple things that you would tell investigators that are pitfalls to the successful execution of a clinical trial, what would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a terrific question. I mean, gosh, I wish I had them all written down. I could probably publish a book or something like that. I think one of the things, Nasya, is that more and more the way I see it is that trials are, as I think everyone knows, they can be complex. And there's always, especially in multi-site trials, this, if you will, this tendency to think about like while I'm at it, why not do X, Y, and Z? And that, of course, adds to the complexity. I think one of the pitfalls I've noticed, especially with a lot of more junior investigators, is that more that the running of these trials doesn't only require scientific and methodological and clinical expertise, but it requires a management mindset as well, and that oftentimes does not get provided in any formal training or classes in for those who have gone through traditional pathways. And so, one of the pitfalls I would say is that a lot of times what we call study chairs, we don't call them PIs simply because we take kind of, again, a team-based approach, but study chairs oftentimes need to, I think, better appreciate the management component of running these multi-site complex studies. And if they don't, then recognizing that is, definitely an important step, and then see how they would work with others, like the coordinating center or other partners, to help them with their areas where they are not, particularly strong or experienced in. I think a lot of times, whenever studies come in, and they say, well, all I want to do is this study, right? It's a simple design, and that's all it is to it. I think a lot of times they also don't get the fact that, at least from the VA side, being a part of a healthcare system, there are other factors that we are trying to consider for why we would invest in that study. And so, going back to my earlier comments about an enterprise approach, it's important for people to realize that, hey, you know what? There might be a clinical program that's already thinking about this, and they might have some perspectives, or there's also a patient group or what have you. So it is, more complex in that regard, because there's more people who are interested in the outcome, and the product, if you will. And so I think that's where I think I see a lot of pitfalls, is that people don't fully appreciate that, and they kind of go forward with what they've learned in terms of trial design, and then they miss a whole other set of considerations that really have to be addressed.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. Let me see if there's any other questions. Since we have you, I might as well ask. The other thing that we've been thinking about locally here is that one of the challenges that comes up with trying to engage multiple VAs in studies is that even though there's an attempt to harmonize policies, oftentimes there's a lot of variation at the local level and how rules and policies are interpreted, such that you would like to be able to say, the Milwaukee VA does it this way, can I also do it this way?
Yeah.
But it turns out not always. So I wonder if you can address if you've run into that, and what thoughts you might have.
Oh, absolutely. We've run into it many times. In fact, we're continuing to try to deal with it both at the Navigate, or that NCI network, as well as through the ADRCs. So one of the things, in case this group is not aware, so through the Alzheimer's Disease Research Centers, they've done a little bit of mapping of the processes. And what was really interesting is, as I noted, there's 5 sites, or five locations. And each one has, like you said, Nasya, kind of a slight variation, or maybe even a drastic variation, of how approvals and the workflow and all that. So that continues to be a challenge for us. We hope that as we go over time, we'll, first of all, have a better understanding of those work maps and workflows, so that we know, like, where are all the variations. And then secondly, by having that information, for those of you who I didn't mention this, but my background, a lot of it is in organizational work design. And so I have kind of a bit of a systems or industrial engineering kind of perspective on things. And so what we'd like to be able to do is say, okay, where are the common kind of themes or common points? Where can we, again, really truly harmonize on a policy, either through policy or just operationally or what have you, and then start to kind of move things in a direction where there will be more and more kind of harmony. And by doing, and the way to do that, of course, is by, again, exporting best practices, having people be aware of it, which is, I think, one of the limitations, where each facility kind of figured it out on their own, and probably they figured it out in a brilliant way because that's what they had to do. But then no one else knows about it. So they were trying to solve the same problem, but they came up with a slightly different approach. And that's where, again, if you think about how that gets perpetuated across all the VA medical centers, we run into the situation we're in now. And so I'm hoping that this enterprise approach will allow us to get a little bit of a better handle on all of this, to be determined as time goes forward.
Sounds great. Thank you very much. I am not seeing any other questions. I'll just take this opportunity to say thank you again, Grant. We're very grateful for your time and the engagement of everyone on this call. Really appreciate all the insights. And thank you to everyone for joining.
My pleasure. And I hope we'll get to connect at some other point because I'm really looking forward to what you're going to be doing there at the Madison VA. I'm really excited for all the opportunities you have there.
Sounds great. Thank you again. Bye, everyone.